I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped through that door. The balloons were hung, the cake sat proudly on the table, the sound of laughter echoed in the room. But not for me. I arrived at my son's birthday party with a smile, carrying a gift wrapped in gold paper, expecting nothing more than joy, family warmth, and the comfort of being surrounded by those I love. But instead of joy, I felt it. The chill in the air, a silence that seemed to follow me wherever I walked. My son, the boy I had raised with my own 2 hands, couldn't even meet my eyes. He looked past me, as if I were no more than a stranger who'd stumbled into his life uninvited. And his wife. I could hear her whispers. I couldn't catch the words, but I could feel them like daggers in my back. Still, I stayed. I told myself I was imagining things. I wanted to believe I was welcome. I wanted to believe that blood still meant something. But deep inside, I knew something was about to happen. Something that would change the way I looked at my own son forever. And then, just as I was trying to swallow that uneasy feeling, my granddaughter came running to me, her little face pale, her voice trembling. She grabbed my hand, squeezed it tight, and whispered words that froze me where I stood. "Grandma, you have to leave here. Now." I looked into her eyes and I saw real fear. Not a child's imagination, not a silly game. Something was wrong, and she knew it. My heart sank, my hands shook, and in that moment, I had to make a choice. Ignore her and stay, or trust her completely, and walk out of that party without looking back. I chose to trust her. And that single choice saved me from the cruel truth about my own son. I had been to so many family gatherings before, birthdays, holidays, even just Sunday dinners. But this one felt different from the moment I walked through the door. It was my son's birthday, and I had told myself all week that I was going to be nothing but happy, nothing but supportive, nothing but the proud mother I had always tried to be. I clutched the gift in my hands, wrapped carefully in gold paper with a neat bow on top. It wasn't anything extravagant, just something I thought he would appreciate, something from the heart. As a mother, you don't stop wanting to give, no matter how old your children become. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. That uneasy silence. It wasn't the silence of an empty room, no. People were laughing, talking, mingling. But around me the air shifted. The smiles were thinner. The voices were lower. And I realized very quickly that the warmth I expected was not meant for me. My son was across the room, surrounded by friends and colleagues. I thought he'd turn when he saw me. I thought he'd light up the way he used to as a boy, the way he used to run into my arms after school, or the way he'd call out, "Mom," when he scored a goal at his soccer games. But now his eyes slid past me like I was just another shadow in the corner. He didn't wave. He didn't even nod. He just kept talking as though I had never entered. And then there was his wife, my daughter-in-law. She didn't say much, but I saw her lean in close to him, her lips barely moving, whispering something I wasn't supposed to hear. But I didn't need to hear the words. I could feel them. That sharpness, that bitterness, that quiet dismissal that comes when you know someone doesn't want you there. I tried to shake it off. I told myself, "You're imagining things. It's just nerves. You've been under stress. Maybe you're reading into it." But deep down, my stomach twisted. A mother knows. She knows when something is wrong, even if she can't put her finger on it yet. I walked further in, greeting a few familiar faces. Some smiled politely, but I noticed the way their eyes darted. Quick, nervous, like they were trying not to linger too long on me. It was as if there was an invisible wall around me, keeping me apart from everyone else. I tried to laugh, tried to make small talk, but my voice sounded strange even to myself, thin and uncertain. And then, as I stood there, holding on to that gift like it was an anchor, my mind drifted back to when things first started to change with my son. He used to call me every Sunday. It was our ritual. He'd ask about my week, I'd ask about his. He'd tell me about work, about the challenges he was facing, about the plans he had for the future. I would listen, offering advice when he wanted it, staying quiet when he didn't. Those calls were my treasure. But then, little by little, they stopped. First it was once every 2 weeks, then once a month, and then silence. I told myself he was busy. Life gets complicated. People get caught up in their own worlds. But a mother feels the distance. It's not just the missed calls, it's the tone of voice when he does answer. Short, distracted, rushed, like he's speaking to someone he has to tolerate, not someone he longs to hear from. And I remembered the last time we had dinner together. I had cooked his favorite meal, set the table just the way he liked when he was young. He sat across from me, scrolling through his phone half the time, barely tasting the food. And when I asked him if everything was all right, he smiled. But it wasn't the smile I knew. It was tight, forced, a mask. I felt then what I was feeling now, that something between us had shifted, something I couldn't reach or fix. Back at the party, I tried to push those memories aside. I focused on the present. I told myself, tonight is about him. Tonight is his celebration. You're here to support, not to dwell. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't ignore the way he avoided me. Every time I moved closer, he seemed to drift further away. I caught his wife's eyes once. Just once. And the look she gave me, it wasn't hatred exactly, no, it was worse. It was pity, mingled with disdain. As if she knew something I didn't. As if she had already decided where I stood in their lives, and it wasn't by their side. I felt my throat tighten. I smiled anyway. That's what mothers do. We smile through the hurt. We smile because we don't want to ruin the moment, because we don't want to admit how much it stings when your own child looks at you like a stranger. I walked to the table where the gifts were being placed. I set mine down gently, almost reverently, as though it might shatter. I stood there for a moment, staring at it, realizing it wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol, my last attempt at saying, I'm here. I still care, I still love you. But would he even see it that way? Or would it just be another box to open, another thing to discard? The laughter around me felt louder, harsher. Every burst of joy sounded like a reminder that it didn't include me. I watched my son throw his head back, laughing with his friends, the same way he used to laugh with me. And I wondered, when had I been replaced? When had I become the outsider in my own family? I tried to mingle again to ease the knot in my chest. A cousin asked me how I'd been, and I gave the usual answer. Oh, fine, fine. But even as I said it, I felt the lie sitting heavy on my tongue. I wasn't fine. I hadn't been fine for a long time. Not since the distance grew between me and my son. I stood near the window for a while, watching the night outside. The cool air seeped in through a crack, and I breathed it in, steadying myself. But even then, the unease didn't leave me. It only grew stronger. I could feel eyes on me, whispers behind me. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was real. Either way, the feeling clung to me like a shadow. I wanted so badly to tell myself I was wrong, to believe that I was still welcome, still loved, still part of this family. But every glance, every whisper, every cold shoulder told me otherwise. And the worst part? I couldn't explain it. I couldn't name it. All I knew was that something was deeply, terribly wrong, and I was standing right in the middle of it. I sipped the glass of water I had been holding, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. But no amount of water could wash away the bitter taste that lingered in my mouth. A mother knows when she's being pushed away. A mother knows when her place in her child's life is slipping through her fingers. And as I stood there, surrounded by people but completely alone, I knew it with every fiber of my being. Still, I stayed. I stayed because leaving would mean admitting defeat. I stayed because I wanted to believe there was still a bridge left between me and my son. I stayed because I wouldn't except the truth that was staring me in the face. But deep inside, in that quiet place where denial can't survive, I felt it. The uneasy feeling, the storm gathering just beyond the horizon, the warning I couldn't yet understand. And though I didn't know it then, that unease wasn't just a mother's worry. It was a signal, a sign, a whisper of the danger that was already circling me, waiting for the moment to strike. I stood there, holding the edge of the table for balance, pretending to admire the decorations while my heart beat heavy inside my chest. The uneasy feeling hadn't left me since I walked through the door. It had only grown worse with each passing minute. And then it happened. I felt a small hand tug at mine, gentle, hesitant but urgent. I turned and saw her. My granddaughter. Her little face was pale, her eyes wide with something I had never seen in her before. Not mischief, not playfulness. No, it was fear. "Grandma," she whispered, her voice trembling so softly that I had to lean down to hear her. Her fingers clutched mine tighter, almost shaking. "Grandma, you have to leave. Now." For a moment, I couldn't move. I just stared at her, stunned. Those words didn't make sense. Leave? Why? This was my son's birthday party, a family celebration. I had barely been there for half an hour. What could she possibly mean? I forced a smile, trying to steady her nerves, trying to steady my own. "Sweetheart, what do you mean? Why would I leave?" Her eyes darted around the room, quick, frantic, as if she were making sure no one could hear her. Then she looked back at me, her little hand squeezing mine with desperate strength. "Just go, Grandma, please. Don't ask questions, just go." The way she said it shook me. Children don't fake that kind of fear. She wasn't playing a game, she wasn't being dramatic. Something had frightened her, something she couldn't even bring herself to explain. And in that moment, my chest tightened. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Was she in danger? Was I? What had my son, her father, done or planned that could make this little girl so terrified for me? I wanted to ask more, to press her for answers. But I saw her lips tremble, her eyes glassy with tears she was fighting to hold back. She shook her head slightly, silently begging me not to push. I swallowed hard. My mind screamed for clarity, but my heart told me everything I needed to know. My granddaughter was afraid, and she was warning me. I glanced across the room. My son was still laughing with his friends, oblivious to the storm that was churning inside me. His wife was by his side, whispering again, throwing occasional glances my way. For a second, I thought, did they see us? Did they know she had pulled me aside? I crouched slightly, bringing myself closer to her height. I stroked her cheek gently, the way I used to when she was a baby. "All right, sweetheart," I whispered back. "If you say I need to go, I'll go." Her shoulders sagged with relief, though her eyes still darted nervously around the room. She nodded quickly, then hugged me tight, tighter than she had in years. That hug nearly broke me, because inside it I felt her fear and her love. She wasn't just asking me to leave, she was trying to protect me. I stood up slowly, forcing myself to act calm. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, but I knew I had to be careful. If I drew attention to myself, it might only make things worse. For me, and maybe even for her. So I picked up my purse from the chair where I'd left it. I pretended to check my phone as though I had somewhere else to be. I walked toward the door at a measured pace, my heart pounding louder with each step. As I passed through the crowd, I caught snippets of conversation, bursts of laughter, glasses clinking together. No one seemed to notice me leaving. No one stopped me. But the entire time, I felt like a spotlight was burning down on my back. I half expected someone to grab my arm, to demand where I was going. But no one did. I reached the door. My hand trembled as I placed it on the knob. I turned once, just once, to look back, And what I saw froze me in place. My granddaughter stood where I had left her, her small frame tucked behind the corner of a table. Her eyes were fixed on me, pleading, praying that I would go through with it, that I would trust her. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever reason she had, whatever fear she couldn't put into words, it was real. She wasn't saving me from embarrassment. She wasn't warning me of some silly accident. No, she was saving me from something far, far darker. I nodded at her, a small, silent promise. Then I turned, opened the door, and stepped outside. The cool night air rushed over me, sharp and clean. For the first time all evening, I could breathe. My chest still ached, my pulse raced, but I felt lighter somehow, as though I had just stepped away from the edge of a cliff. I stood there for a long moment, clutching my purse, staring up at the sky. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind, but the one that echoed the loudest was, what was my son planning? I didn't have the answer, not yet. But I knew this. My granddaughter had saved me. Her voice, her warning, her trembling little hands, those had been my lifeline. And though I walked away confused, though I left without the clarity I craved, deep in my bones I felt it. I had done the right thing. Because when a child who loves you looks at you with fear in their eyes and begs you to leave, you don't argue, you don't doubt, you listen. And thank God I did. The door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time that evening, I could breathe. The sound of laughter and music was muffled now, trapped inside those walls, while I stood outside alone in the cool night air. My hands were shaking as I clutched my purse, the echo of my granddaughter's words still ringing in my ears. Grandma, you have to leave. Now. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might lose my nerve. So I walked down the path, my heels clicking against the stone walkway, each step heavier than the last. The shadows stretched long in the yard, the porch light glowing faintly behind me. When I reached my car, I sat for a moment in the driver's seat, frozen. My fingers gripped the steering wheel, but I couldn't turn the key. My mind was spinning, tangled in a storm of questions. Why did she warn me? What was I walking away from? Did I just embarrass myself, leaving my own son's birthday party like some unwanted guest? I rested my forehead against the wheel, fighting back the tears that burned in my eyes. A mother is supposed to know her place in her child's life. A mother is supposed to feel wanted, needed. But tonight I felt like an intruder. And yet, I also felt something else. A quiet certainty, buried beneath all the doubt. My granddaughter's eyes had spoken louder than her words. She was scared, terrified, and she had chosen to protect me. That wasn't something I could ignore. Finally, I turned the key. The engine roared softly to life, and I pulled out of the driveway. As I drove down the darkened street, the laughter from the party faded into nothing. The farther I got, the more my doubt returned. My thoughts twisted around each other, choking me. What if I overreacted? What if she was just being dramatic, or upset about something small? What if my son noticed I was gone and thought I'd left in anger? Would this only push him further away from me? I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone chasing after me. But the road was empty, quiet. Just me and the hum of my engine. I drove aimlessly at first, not wanting to go straight home. My mind needed time, space, distance to untangle itself. I passed familiar streets, houses with warm yellow windows, families gathered inside. I wondered if they knew how lucky they were, to sit together without fear, without secrets, without that gnawing tension that eats away at a mother's heart. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my body felt heavy, like I had been carrying a weight too large for me. I parked the car and sat there in the silence, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The house loomed before me, dark and still. I had never felt so alone. I went inside, set down my purse, and poured myself a glass of water, But even then, the unease lingered. It clung to me, whispering that tonight was not just about awkward glances or whispered words. No, there had been something else, something darker, that my granddaughter had tried to shield me from. The phone rang the next afternoon. It was my neighbor, a woman who had known me for years, someone who lived just a few houses down from my son. Her voice was low, cautious, the kind of tone people use when they're about to say something they shouldn't. "Were you at the party last night?" she asked. "Yes," I said slowly, "but I left early." There was a pause, then she said, "Good. I don't know how to tell you this, but something happened after you left." My heart thudded in my chest. I gripped the receiver tighter. "What do you mean? What happened?" She hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. "I don't want to spread gossip, but I saw people leaving in a hurry. I heard shouting. Later, someone told me that there had been a plan. Something about humiliating you, about making sure you'd never show your face there again." I froze. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "What are you talking about?" She lowered her voice even more. "I don't know the full details, but I heard your son and his wife had arranged something cruel. People said they were planning to embarrass you in front of everyone, to put you in your place." The words hit me like a blow. My knees went weak, and I sank into the chair beside me. I couldn't breathe. My son, my own flesh and blood, had planned to shame me, to turn a celebration into my humiliation. I thought back to the strange looks, the whispers, the coldness in his eyes. Suddenly, it all made sense. That's why my granddaughter had pulled me aside. That's why she had begged me to leave. She had overheard something, or maybe just sensed it the way children sometimes do. She had known what was coming, and she had acted out of love. Tears slid down my cheeks as the truth settled in. My granddaughter had saved me, from humiliation, from betrayal, from the pain of seeing my son carry out such cruelty. I thanked my neighbor for telling me, though my voice shook as I spoke. When I hung up the phone, I sat in silence, staring at the wall. The house felt colder than ever, but my heart burned with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow because my son had changed in ways I couldn't comprehend. Gratitude because even in the darkness, there was still light. That light was my granddaughter, the only one who had cared enough to warn me, to protect me when no one else would. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed her words over and over. "Grandma, you have to leave. Now." At the time, I had thought they were strange, even confusing. But now they echoed like a lifeline, a shield, a gift. Because if I hadn't listened, if I had stayed, I would have been destroyed by the very people I loved most. And it was only because of her, my sweet, frightened granddaughter, that I had escaped. The phone call from my neighbor had shaken me, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. For days afterward, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to one unbearable question. Why? Why would my own son, my boy, the one I raised, the one I sacrificed everything for, want to hurt me like that? The uneasy feeling that had followed me out of that birthday party refused to fade. Instead, it burrowed deeper, whispering that the truth was still out there, waiting for me to uncover it. And when I finally did, I wished I hadn't, because the truth cut deeper than any knife could. It started with whispers. A cousin called me a few days later, her voice uneasy, carrying the same careful tone my neighbor had used. She asked if I was all right. When I pressed her, she admitted she'd overheard things at the party. Things about me. She told me that before I arrived, my son and his wife had been laughing with their friends, planning a cruel little game. They wanted to make me the fool in front of everyone. They had arranged to call me up during the speeches, to thank me for something that wasn't mine to claim. They wanted to mock the small savings I lived on, to paint me as weak, needy, even desperate. And then, this was the part that broke me. They wanted to announce that I had been taken care of, that I wouldn't have to worry about money anymore, because they were going to handle my affairs. On the surface, it sounded generous, like a gift, but the way it was said, the way it was framed, it wasn't kindness. It was humiliation. It was a public way of stripping me of my dignity, of announcing to the world that I was no longer capable of standing on my own 2 feet. And then the cousin hesitated before adding something worse. There had been talk, not just about embarrassing me, but about legal papers, about power of attorney, about shifting certain family assets into my son's control. I don't know how much of it was rumor and how much was fact, but the implication was clear. My son wanted me out of the way, out of the picture, out of the family decisions, for his own gain. When I hung up the phone, my hands trembled so violently I could barely set it back on the receiver. I sat there, numb, staring at nothing. My mind replayed his laughter, his refusal to meet my eyes, his wife's whispers. Suddenly, it all made sense. The distance, the coldness, the way I had felt like a stranger at that party. It wasn't in my imagination. It was deliberate. My son had been pushing me out slowly, quietly, methodically, and now he was ready to make it final. I thought back to all the nights I had sat at the kitchen table, counting pennies to make sure he had lunch money for school. The times I skipped meals so he could eat. The nights I stayed up sewing patches onto his clothes because we couldn't afford new ones. I remembered holding his hand when he was sick, rocking him through the fevers, praying to God to keep him alive. I remembered how proud I had been the day he graduated, the tears streaming down my face as I clapped louder than anyone else. And now, that same boy had grown into a man who wanted to strip me of everything I had left. The pain was indescribable. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the tearing of something sacred. The bond between mother and child is supposed to be unbreakable. And yet here I was, staring into the wreckage of what used to be love. I tried to tell myself there had to be some mistake, that maybe he hadn't meant it that way. Maybe his wife had pushed him into it. Maybe it was just cruel talk, nothing more. But deep down, I knew better. My son had always been ambitious, hungry for success, hungry for control. And somewhere along the way, that hunger had swallowed his heart. I wept that night. I wept like I hadn't wept in years. Not the quiet tears of disappointment, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a mother mourning the loss of her child. Because that's what it felt like. The boy I raised was gone. In his place stood a man I didn't recognize. A man who would trade his own mother's dignity for power, for money, for pride. The next morning, I received another call, this time from someone I barely knew, a friend of a friend who had also been at the party. Their voice carried the same message. I was lucky I had left, because if I hadn't, the humiliation would have been brutal, public, and permanent. They described how my son had been planning to pull me up in front of everyone, how he had rehearsed lines that would make me look helpless, incapable, a burden. A burden. That word broke me all over again. Was that what I was to him now? Just another weight on his shoulders, something to discard, to mock, to control? I sat in my living room, staring at the photos on the wall, pictures of birthdays, holidays, graduations, pictures of him smiling, hugging me, telling me he loved me. And all I could think was, when did it change? When did I stop being his mother and start being his obstacle? The truth settled in slowly, painfully, like a knife twisting in my chest. My son hadn't just planned to embarrass me. He hadn't just wanted to make me look weak. He had wanted to erase me from his life. Not physically, but socially, financially, emotionally. He wanted me out of the family picture so he could take my place, claim my role, control what was left. And the cruelest part of all? He had been ready to do it in front of everyone. Not behind closed doors, not in a private conversation, but publicly. As if to prove to the world that I no longer mattered. I realized then that my granddaughter's warning had saved me from more than just one bad night. She had saved me from a wound so deep it might never have healed. Because if I had stood there in that room, if I had watched my own son humiliate me in front of friends and family, I don't know if I could have ever recovered. I sat there, clutching a photo of him as a little boy, tears blurring my vision. I whispered to the empty room, "What happened to you? What happened to the boy I raised?" But there was no answer. Only silence. The truth about my son was clear now, as much as I didn't want to believe it. He had chosen his path, and it was a path that left me behind. And the cruel reality, the one that hollowed me out from the inside, was this. My son was ready to harm me, not to my face, not with fists or weapons, but with something far worse. With betrayal, with calculated cruelty, with the kind of coldness that turns a mother's love into ashes. That was the truth. And once I knew it, I could never unknow it. I could have screamed. I could have confronted him. I could have stormed into his house, slammed my fists on the table and demanded to know why. Why my own son thought I was nothing more than a burden to humiliate, a name to erase, a problem to solve. But I didn't. I had lived too long, endured too much, to waste my energy on shouting matches that go nowhere. Anger burns hot and fast. It consumes you, and then it leaves you empty. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. No, if he wanted to strip me of my dignity, I would show him what dignity truly looked like. And so I stayed calm. I spent days thinking, praying, remembering every lesson life had taught me. I knew that revenge didn't always have to be loud, dramatic, or cruel. Sometimes the sharpest blade was silence. Sometimes the greatest victory came not from striking back, but from outlasting those who tried to break you. But make no mistake, I would not stay silent forever. I began quietly, carefully. I pulled out old papers, records, and documents. I looked at what I owned, what I had worked for, what my late husband and I had built together. Every penny, every property, every asset. I made sure it was protected. I met with a lawyer, quietly, without a word to my son or his wife. I signed papers that ensured my son would have no control over me, my estate, or my choices. If he had hoped to seize power of attorney, to manage my affairs, to drain me dry, he would find nothing but locked doors. I also made one final, deliberate decision. When my time came, my granddaughter, the same child who had tugged at my hand and whispered, "Grandma, you have to leave now," would be the one I left everything to. Not him, not the woman who whispered behind my back, not the ones who saw me as disposable. Her, only her, because she, even in her young years, had shown me more loyalty, more courage, more love than my son had in all his adult life. And then I waited. I didn't cut ties. I didn't tell him what I knew. I simply stepped back, silent as stone, and watched as life unfolded. It didn't take long. Greed has a way of exposing itself. My son and his wife, frustrated that their plan had failed, began to unravel. They tried again and again to bait me into situations where they could push me out, but I didn't bite. I stayed polite, detached, untouchable. They whispered, they schemed, but without my cooperation, their plans went nowhere. The beauty of silent revenge is this. It allows the guilty to reveal themselves. They dig their own graves while you stand by, patient, unshaken. Soon people began to notice. Family, friends, neighbors. They saw how cold he had become. They noticed the way he treated me, the way his wife sneered when she thought no one was looking. I didn't have to say a word. Others started to whisper for me. Others started to question him. And when the truth came out, that he had tried to humiliate his own mother, that he had schemed to control what wasn't his, it wasn't my voice that exposed him. It was theirs. His reputation began to crumble. Invitations grew fewer, friendships thinned. The same people who once clapped at his parties began to look at him with suspicion. Respect, once his prized possession, slipped through his fingers like sand. And I carried myself with grace. I smiled, I nodded, I went about my life with quiet dignity. People saw the difference. They saw a mother who, despite betrayal, refused to lower herself to bitterness. They saw strength. And in that strength, my revenge was complete. Because revenge isn't about screaming, fighting, or hurting back. It's about showing the one who betrayed you that you don't need them. That their cruelty didn't destroy you, that you are stronger than their worst intentions. And nothing wounded my son more than watching me thrive without him. But my greatest act of silent revenge was still to come. One afternoon, my granddaughter came to visit me. She curled up on my sofa, her small hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. She looked up at me with those bright, honest eyes, the same eyes that had saved me that night. And she asked softly, "Grandma, are you mad at Daddy?" For a moment, my throat tightened. How could I explain betrayal to a child? How could I tell her that the man she loved had tried to hurt me? So I didn't. I smiled, brushed her hair back, and said, "Sweetheart, sometimes people lose their way. But you helped me find mine." She smiled back, a smile so pure it brought tears to my eyes. In that moment, I knew the truth. My son might have betrayed me. He might have tried to erase me. But through it all, I had been given something far greater, a bond with my granddaughter that no scheme, no cruelty, no greed could ever take away. She became my source of hope, my anchor, my reminder that love still existed in this family, even if it skipped a generation. And so, I poured my energy into her. I taught her the recipes my mother once taught me. I told her stories of her grandfather, of the man who had built a life with me from nothing. I showed her what real family meant. And quietly, behind closed doors, I ensured her future. My will, my estate, my belongings, all of it went to her. That was my silent revenge. Not shouting, not punishing, not tearing anyone down, but building something stronger in the hands of the only one who had stood by me. My son and his wife never saw it coming. They thought they had outsmarted me, that I was naive, helpless, a burden. But in the end, it was their own greed, their own cruelty that cost them everything. And me? I walked away with my dignity intact, my granddaughter by my side, and the peace of knowing that justice doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is patient. Sometimes it is the smile of a grandmother who knows that love and legacy are the sweetest forms of revenge. So when I look back on it now, I don't feel anger. I don't feel hate. I feel victory. Quiet, steady, undeniable victory. Because my son may have tried to destroy me, but I stood taller than his betrayal. And in the end, I won. In that moment, I lost the son I thought I knew, but I found the courage to protect myself. And most of all, I realized I still had a granddaughter who loved me enough to save me. That love was stronger than betrayal, stronger than greed, stronger than the silence that had grown between me and my son. When I look back now, I don't see the cruelty. Not first. I see her small hand tugging mine, her trembling voice whispering, "Grandma, you have to leave." That child gave me something no one else could, truth in its purest form. And because of her, I walked away before I was broken beyond repair. Yes, I lost the boy I once rocked to sleep, the one I sacrificed everything for. But in losing him, I gained clarity. I gained strength. And I learned that family is not defined by who shares your blood. It's defined by who shares your heart. So I stand here, older, wiser, scarred but not defeated. I am still a mother. I am still a grandmother. And I am still here, telling you this story, because love, real love, cannot be silenced.